Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the post-game pod from the Wolves' Game 4 loss to Denver. We'll talk about how the Nuggets, and especially Nikola Jokic, countered the way that the Timberwolves were playing defense against the Joker. And we'll talk about Anthony Edwards' fantastic game, where the Wolves fell short. There were a number of areas. A fun Game 4, but now the series is tied at 2 going back to Denver. We'll break the whole thing down. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Monday, everybody. A disappointing Game 4 loss on Sunday on the heels of an even more disappointing Game 3 blowout loss on Friday night. This is the post-game pod from Sunday. We'll talk about, it was really a fun game. It's just the Wolves were playing catch-up basically the entire time. We'll talk about what stuck out the most to me with what Denver did offensively. Really kind of an adjustment to the Wolves counter for Jokic and a couple of different things really that Denver did. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Wolves kind of punchless offense outside of Anthony Edwards and went nuts again. He had 44. A lot to get through here in this one. Really, I've got a lot of stuff coming out of this game, more than I would have had I had a full post-game pod after Game 3. This one just has a lot more to talk about because outside of a couple of things, this was a pretty closely contested game, and there are positives to take from it, even though it's awful to not have the momentum. You know, the Wolves had every opportunity to either close out or have a commanding 3-1 lead going back to Denver, and now the momentum and the home court advantage is back on the side of the Nuggets going to Game 5 in Denver on Tuesday. So a lot to get to here today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right. So on the heels of Friday, the Timberwolves just like and Friday was more about Denver playing extremely well on Friday than about the Wolves playing poorly, but the Wolves did not come prepared to play Friday. And when you do that against a defending champion who also then plays extremely well and is very motivated, like it's not going to be a close game. And it wasn't. The Wolves deserved to lose Friday. There were some things that didn't go their way, sure, but that was just a bad loss. Sunday, you could bet the Timberwolves. It was not hard to predict the Timberwolves would come out much more ready to go on Sunday. And of course, there's all those stats in the regular season. I think what was the stat floating around? The Wolves lost by double digits. Then they were 10-0 in the following game. And you know, there's just a lot of like you take a 3-1 lead, you win the series more often than not, right? Vastly more often than not, way more often than not. So, of course, the Wolves are going to come out better. And they did. They were up to, like a 14-9, 14-8, 14-7 lead, something like that early in the first quarter. But then Denver punched back and just kind of expanded their lead. They were up 5 at the end of the first quarter. They got up by as many as I think it was 17. The Timberwolves got it back down to like, I don't know, 11 or 12 or 10, somewhere around there. And then the Nuggets went on that crazy run at the end of the second quarter. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But what I want to focus on first was the more macro adjustments. And like this thing does boil down to like 5 things. And I tweeted this out shortly after the game. And I can kind of tick those off quickly. I guess it makes sense to start there. But I want to focus more on the adjustments, which I didn't get into on Twitter, although I alluded to them. Jokic was awesome in this game. We'll talk about the adjustments that Denver made here in a moment. And Jamal Murray got really hot when it made the biggest impact. The end of the first half, the end of the second quarter was awful. And we'll get into that. Aaron Gordon just shooting lights out. He made his first 10 shots. And like I said this on Twitter too, I don't think, will he ever make 10 shots in a row again? And he made his first 10 shots in this game. And missed free throws. We can talk a little bit about that as well. So a lot to get to. Let's talk about those adjustments that I alluded to first. So number one, the Nuggets had Aaron Gordon bring the ball up the floor instead of Jamal Murray more often than not, when possible, right? When they took the ball out of the net, when it was after after a dead ball situation, Aaron Gordon was bringing the ball up the floor. Well, what does that do? Well, first of all, if the Wolves want to use ball pressure, it means they're going to have to use a smaller player than Aaron Gordon, number one, but then that person isn't necessarily guarding Jamal Murray. And it also saves Jamal Murray. It puts less mileage on Jamal Murray to have to deal with Alexander Walker or Jaden McDaniels or whomever riding his hip all the way down the floor like he did, game two, obviously, and the Wolves want to do all the time. It basically removes that from the equation. Aaron Gordon's a good enough ball handler. And then it also keeps the Wolves from putting Rudy Gobert on Aaron Gordon from the jump. It makes the Wolves have to make that adjustment in the half court to kind of shuffle their personnel if they really want Gobert on Gordon in terms of that being the matchup. And Gordon's big enough, and again, a good enough ball handler that he can shield the ball from McDaniels or Alexander Walker or Conley or whoever's guarding him bringing the ball up the floor. That was significant. Just from saving the mileage, saving the wear and tear, saving the energy for this game period for Jamal Murray by just making that adjustment where it's not him bringing the ball up the floor. Okay, so that's number one. The other thing they did, and this is a little bit more significant, and it's not as noticeable, but when the Timberwolves had Gobert on Gordon, which was their preferred matchup, then and really actually early in the game, Gobert was on Jokic more often than I would have expected, certainly more often than he was early in the series. And we can maybe talk more about that later. I thought that was interesting for Minnesota. But what the Nuggets did is when Jokic set a screen, he wasn't rolling as hard as he typically would. He was basically short rolling, which is not like, obviously Joker does that and he can't do it because he's an incredible passer, right? But he was just kind of finding the soft spot, like almost like you would do just straight up, if you weren't setting a screen, or like you would do if you're a receiver in the NFL, right? You find the soft spot in the zone, you sit down, you wait for the pass. Jokic was setting the screen and he was rolling to wherever the soft spot in the Timberwolves defense was, which is often basically just a little below the free throw line, just a pretty basic short roll. And it makes Gobert make a choice. If he's going to step up, Jokic is an incredible passer. He can hit, baseline cutter, hit somebody in the opposite corner, the weak side. And if Gobert doesn't step up, which is typically what would happen, is he would try and kind of play in between. He's one of the few guys in the league that can do that. Gobert is Jokic just hits the floater. And he was, I don't know, this is not the exact number, but probably 6 of 8, 7 of 10, something like that on those floaters. Like he crushed 10-foot floaters, 8-foot floaters in this game. And that's obviously always a good shot for Jokic, but more challenging over somebody like Rudy Gobert. And he knocked those down. I thought that was a key adjustment because, again, it forces the decision from Gobert and it plays to Jokic's strength, strengths which are obviously passing and then, of course, touch in the paint, touch anywhere near the basket, and the ability to just shoot it like a centimeter over Gobert's outstretched hand, which he basically always is able to do, it seems like. One more adjustment they made that I want to talk about, and we'll get into Ant, we'll get into his 44, we'll get into the issues, the other, basically almost everyone else that the Timberwolves had on the offensive end of the floor. And so more, macro takes on this particular game as we look ahead to Game 5 on Tuesday. So we'll do all of that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch your winnings roll in. You can get in on the playoff action when up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Again, $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey right now. Second round postseason for both the NHL and the NBA. With your entries there today on Prize Picks, again, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just download the app today. You can use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today. The code is LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting, and there will be a lot of shouting on Monday with all the pundits that predicted the Nuggets' demise prematurely, and then all the responses to the pundits who predicted the Nuggets' demise prematurely. Instead of listening to all that shouting, just make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, we talked about the Nuggets adjustment in terms of Aaron Gordon bringing the ball up the floor. We talked about Jokic short rolling and forcing the Timberwolves into making a decision. And the Timberwolves just weren't quite as crisp with the rotations on the back end, and that was an issue. Another adjustment isn't as much an adjustment as just something that happened in this game that didn't happen in either game in Denver, and that was Jamal Murray just being a better decision maker. And I know he went crazy in game 3, and he went crazy for a stretch. I think it was mostly second quarter in this game when the Nuggets opened up that big lead. He was just hitting, that crazy, 19-foot step back over Jaden McDaniels. He had no business shooting it. Went in. He obviously hit the not quite three-quarters court, but greater than half court shot at the buzzer in the second quarter. He was pretty quiet offensively in the second half, but Jamal Murray's decision-making was really, really solid in this game. He was not really baited into, remember we talked about this after game 2 pretty extensively last week about the Timberwolves kind of putting 2 on the ball and then recovering to Jokic quickly. He wasn't baited into that in this game. He just made the right reads almost every time. And the line at the end of the night wasn't outstanding, like 19 points on 17 shots for Murray. The Wolves did goad him into some tough shots late. But 8 assists to 3 turnovers is palatable if you're Denver. And given the question marks around his calf, not question marks, everybody knows he's hurt. And even Michael Malone admitted they weren't sure how the calf would respond after less than 48 hours rest, right? Or about 48 hours, not rest, but 48 hours in between games, between game 3 and game 4. And he was great early. And the Wolves did a good job on him overall in the second half. But again, the quick decision-making was really big for Jamal Murray in this game. For the Wolves offensively, I thought, and I should say this, actually. Let's just stick with the defense. I mentioned Aaron Gordon already. I actually think overall, the Timberwolves weren't that bad defensively in this game. I know Denver scored 115. I know they shot 57% from the field and 45% from 3, but they only had 15 free throw attempts. They turned it over 12 times, which, it's fine. They only had 5 offensive rebounds. Other than like a few possessions here and there and some transition stuff, which actually was pretty good too overall, Minnesota's half-court rotations weren't bad. The pick-and-roll defense wasn't bad. Jokic is just an incredible player. Jamal Murray was hot in the second quarter. Jokic was great overall. And Aaron Gordon made 11 to 12 shots, including 2 of 2 on threes. Like, he was making tough shots. He hit that one when the Wolves pulled to within, I think it was 8 or 9 in the fourth quarter, like mid-fourth quarter. He had a step back over Rudy Gobert from like 18 feet. Like, what is that? Like, Aaron Gordon doesn't make that shot. And he may never make that shot again. And that's sort of he had 27 points on 12 shots. This is Aaron Gordon we're talking about. It doesn't make any sense. It's not something that is going to happen again. The Timberwolves should not change how they're guarding him. I guess the Justin Holiday thing's continued, but I have more faith in Justin Holiday hitting open threes than Aaron Gordon hitting almost any shot from the field. And here we are. If this is a thing now, then I don't know. It just baffles me. The dude is 29% on threes in the regular season. I know his overall field goal percentage was high because it's mostly dunks and threes, right? That's what Aaron Gordon shoots. He hadn't shot over, 29% this year from 3, 35% the year before, 33.5% before that. First year in Denver, I guess split between Denver and Orlando, he was around 30%. 30% the year before in Orlando, 35%. He's only shot greater than 35% 1 year in his career. And only shot greater than 34% 3 times in his career in terms of three-point attempts. And again, just dunks and threes. And he's hitting mid-range jumpers in this game, which is exactly – the Wolves are treating Aaron Gordon a lot like what the Nuggets do with Jaden McDaniels. And McDaniels is a more gifted all-around offensive player than Aaron Gordon. I know Aaron Gordon was a freak athlete. I get it. But Jay McDaniels with the ball in his hands in terms of scoring is a little bit more dangerous than Aaron Gordon with the ball in his hands. He can just do a few more things. And yet Aaron Gordon is making the Timberwolves pay. Or at least he did in this game. And I don't know. That's one of those things you flush it. It's not going to happen again. He's not going to make his first 10 shots in game 5. He's not going to go 11 of 12 in game 5. He may never do it again in his career. He was incredible in this game. And to me, that's the biggest outlier in this entire game. We'll circle back to that later. Offensively for Minnesota, the ball movement was okay, but nobody could hit a shot except for Anthony Edwards. Conley finished 5 of 12, which is fine. Gobert only had 5 shot attempts, period. Cat was a horrific 5 of 18. Timberwolves, not named Anthony Edwards, were bad from outside the end. I guess not named by Conley. But you take out Ant's three-point shooting, the rest of the Timberwolves were, 6 of 20 from outside the arc, which, quick math, that's 30%. So non-Ant Timberwolves shot 30% from outside the arc in this game. Minnesota overall then ended up 11 of 28, 39.3%, which is fine. Conley was 3 for 7. Ant was 5 for 8. I thought, in general, the ball movement was okay. There were a couple of possessions when things were a bit disjointed. The Wolves were trying desperately to come back where it was like, Cat was the biggest problem, right? And I will defend Cat. There was some stuff flying around. There was always stuff flying around on Twitter, on X. But Cat is not like the reason they lost this game. I know he shot 5 of 18. I know he did some silly stuff. But like Reggie Miller, like lambasting Karl-Anthony Towns for committing his second personal foul midway through the third quarter because they need his fouls at the end of the game was one of the dumbest pieces of commentary, which is saying a lot. Come on, man. It's a second foul midway through the third quarter. Like, that's not the biggest issue here. It was the efficiency. It was the flailing. But again, he only had 1 turnover, which was a silly offensive foul. He shoved Michael Porter Jr. out of the way. That I think was his 3rd foul in the fourth quarter at a bad time. That was silly. There were bad moments for Cat. I'm not defending him. He was not good in this game. But there were other issues, like Aaron Gordon going 11 for 12 from the floor and making 10 shots in a row, making both of his 3-point attempts. Jokic being Jokic. I thought Towns should have been guarding Joker earlier in the game one-on-one. Again, he only committed 3 fouls in this game. I think that would have been a viable strategy for Minnesota as it had been earlier in the series. So Cat overall, 5 of 18 isn't going to cut it. 1 of 4 outside the arc. He was uncharacteristically just 2 of 4 from the line. 13 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, only the 1 turnover. Cat was far from the worst player on the floor for Minnesota. And we'll get to studs and duds here next segment because, man, there were some guys who did not play well in this game. So I think my biggest things. Oh, I should mention the missed free throws, and that's, I guess I did mention it already. But down the stretch, at one point, the Wolves missed 3 in a row at the line. Rudy missed a couple, and Ant missed 1. Ant was 7 of 8 from the line, and Rudy, I know he's been shooting free throws much better lately. 5 of 9 for him is pretty in line with where he is for his career, almost exactly. But the last couple of games hasn't been as good as the Phoenix series or late in the regular season. So who knows? Maybe we've regressed back to where we should be in terms of Rudy's free throw shooting. Of course, when you lose by 8 and you miss 9 free throws, that's going to stand out. But, like, they were never going to make every one of their free throws, right? So, like, that kind of bugs me. That going around Twitter, like, oh, they lost by 8. They missed 9 free throws. Sure. But were they going to shoot 27 of 27 from the line? I mean, Denver missed 3 free throws too. So, yeah, you probably should have made, 6 of those 9 free throws? Of course, that makes it a closer game, a 1-possession game or whatever. I guess that would be a 3-point game then at that point. But it's not like they would have won if they had shot free throws better necessarily. It would have changed the way the end of the game played out. Those points matter, et cetera, et cetera. I get it. But the bigger thing was they got to the line 27 times. They still had a 6-point advantage in terms of made free throws because they did a good job getting to the line. So all that to say, free throw shooting, not great. That's a problem. But it's also fixable, right? Like, Ant's going to be better than, 7 of 8 is good. Sorry, Cat's going to be better than 2 of 4. Jaden's generally going to be better than 2 of 4 from the line. Those are things that are going to shift. The last thing, and this will kind of tease into the studs and duds. I mean, what Minnesota's supposed to have this massive depth advantage, and I harped on this last week. And each team basically played 7 guys plus an 8th guy for just a few minutes. And the Nuggets bench just outplayed the Wolves bench, and it wasn't close. Justin Holiday and Christian Brown were great. Reggie Jackson was good in his 9 minutes. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, not a great game. Kyle Anderson, a horrific game. Naz Reid was fine, but he only played 19 minutes. So I want to talk a little bit more about, we'll get to studs and duds, but the depth thing, and we'll do that next. And that's pretty much how we'll close out the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count right now at FanDuel. Tuesday night, Game 5. Timberwolves are 5-point underdogs at Denver. Not a shock. I thought it would be close. I thought it would be 4. We'll see where it goes by Tuesday. 5 is a little rich, I think. I get it. Denver probably, can smell blood in the water. You win at home. They've already beat Minnesota twice in Minnesota. You go back to Minnesota for Game 6 thinking you can win. Of course, Denver now has home court with 3 games left. It's a 3-game series. Denver gets 2 home games. So, but on the flip side, Minnesota's won both games in Denver. So, I don't know. 5 games seems like a little bit much. In terms of the series overall now, the Wolves are underdogs. Denver is -176 to win the series. Minnesota's +142 over at FanDuel. So go check that out again. $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so in terms of depth, Minnesota should have a depth advantage. Justin Holiday's been great the last couple of games. Reggie Jackson was better today than I think he has been overall. He, of course, tweaked his ankle in Game 2. Christian Brown played better than he has, and I don't know why he wasn't playing more earlier in the series. I thought he was okay defensively against Ant, but, of course, Ant got to where he wanted for the most part in this game anyway. Again, nobody on the Nuggets can stop him one-on-one. Naz was good for Minnesota, 5 of 6. He had a couple little bursts in this game that were big. He finished with 11 and 4, 3 fouls in 19 minutes, struggled to guard Jokic. That was the biggest thing. It's not quite as simple as looking at the box score and saying, Naz had 11 points on 6 shots in 19 minutes. Cat had 13 points and 18 shots in 38 minutes. Less Cat, more Naz. It's not quite that simple. Cat was simply better defensively in this game and has been in the playoffs. Cat's a bigger body than Naz. He's more physical than Naz defensively. The problem in this game was the defense. It wasn't the offense. I'm not saying Naz shouldn't have played more. I think they could have found a way to do that, right? Like Rudy ended up in a little bit of foul trouble. Rudy wasn't bad in this game by any stretch, but it wasn't his best game. We'll put it that way. And, Naz I thought was effective with the ball in his hand. So it would have been good to see a little more Naz. Nickeil had a rough game. Might as well go to studs and duds. Let's do studs first, I guess. And then well, actually, no, let's keep on the duds train. We'll end on a positive note. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, man, not his best game. It wasn't great in Game 3 either, and of course was phenomenal both games in Denver. Maybe it's a road thing. We'll see if he plays great in Game 5. 2 points on 1 of 7, 0 of 4 outside the arc. He took a couple of tough threes. Like he took one above the break that he hesitated and shot it, and that's just not a good. He's an outstanding catch and shoot guy from the corners. We've talked about that. One of the very best in the entire NBA. And he had a deep corner tough one that rimmed out late in the game when the Wolves were playing catch up. But the above the break miss wasn't great. The shot selection, decision making for Nickeil was rough in this game. 2 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds in 24 minutes. Shot 1 of 7, 0 of 4 from outside the arc, and had a turnover. He was a -20 in 24 minutes in this game. -20 in 24 minutes in this game. Kyle Anderson, somehow worse. Let me give my quick. If you don't listen to the show regularly, first of all, welcome. Please subscribe, follow, listen, all that stuff. I'll give my quick spiel on single game plus minus. It usually means nothing. It usually means nothing unless there's a crazy outlier. There's so many other factors. I'm not at all. I'm the opposite of a truth or whatever that is. In a single game, individual player plus minus, there's too many other factors, too much noise for that to be like a real thing. But if you have a man that's a -18 in 6 minutes, then something did not go right. And we talked on the show before. This wasn't the best series for Kyle Anderson. I didn't feel that way about the Phoenix series either. Kyle Anderson makes more sense against the Thunder or the Mavericks, for that matter, than he does against Denver. He ended up only playing 6 minutes. Didn't register a single solitary statistic except for 0 for 1 from the field. He took a terrible forced, 10-footer and basically backed down. I don't even remember who was guarding him. Somebody smaller that he thought he could take in the post. And he had a personal foul. No rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, no points, no turnovers. He played 6 minutes and was a minus 18. Remarkable. I don't know how you even do that. It's really bad. I don't know how you play but now he's like the 8th guy, right? Are you going to give those minutes to Monte Morris and play smaller? You can give him to Jordan McLaughlin. They tried to do that in game 3 when things were going sideways. They gave some rotation minutes to McLaughlin. Obviously, the team wants to play big, but could you just give those slow-mo minutes to Naz Reid and assuming Rudy or Cat are not in foul trouble? Look at it this way. Cat didn't play well. He was a +4. Kyle Anderson was a minus 18. So again, plus minus does not tell the whole story because Cat didn't have a good game. But that's how bad Kyle Anderson was. And I already said Alexander Walker was a minus 20 in 24 minutes. This is the bench advantage that Minnesota's supposed to have. And instead, you have Christian Brown and Reggie Jackson and Justin Holiday all with easy positive plus minuses. This is an 8-point game. It's not like it was a 20-point game. And yet you have Slow-Mo as a minus 18 in 6 minutes and Akil as a minus 20 in 24 minutes. On the flip side of that, I want to talk about guys who, actually, let's keep talking duds. I have to give it to Karl-Anthony Towns. We're going to give all 3 of these guys duds. Cat was not good. We talked already about him. I don't want to spend too much time here. 13 points on 18 shots, 1 of 4 outside the arc. Some questionable decision-making, to put it lightly. 2 of 4 at the line, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, only the 1 turnover, but it was a costly one when the Wolves were trying to make a run. An unnecessary shove. He gives offensive foul to Michael Porter Jr. An unnecessary shove he gave to Michael Porter Jr. That was an offensive foul. I thought he was fine defensively. He just didn't have as big of an impact as he did in games 1 and 2. Not a good Cat game. Of course, the Timberwolves need more out of their number 2 scorer. They need more than 13. He's better than this. It was the one stinker he's had in the postseason. And, of course, everyone's going to fixate on it nationally and even locally. Guy's allowed to have one bad game in, 7 games in the postseason now? No, 8 games in the postseason. Not a great time for it. And if Cat plays like he has in so many other games in this playoffs, if he drops a 20 and 10, do the Wolves win? Maybe. Is Aaron Gordon going to shoot 11 of 12 again from the field? Okay. On the flip side of the plus-minus conversation, another way to look at this, Anthony Edwards had 44 points in this game. He played 45 minutes. In the 45 minutes that Anthony Edwards was on the floor, the Timberwolves won those minutes by 5 points. And the Wolves won the non-Joker minutes in the third quarter when he was on the bench with foul trouble. But overall on the night, it was not profitable for Minnesota with Jokic on the bench, which is very disappointing. When Ant was not in the game, the Wolves were a minus 13. So the on-off there for Ant. That's an 18-point swing, a +5 with Ant on the floor in 45 minutes. Sub 3 minutes with no Ant on the floor, the Wolves lost by 13 points, which was his normal rest, right? Early second quarter and I guess it was early mid fourth quarter. Ant was awesome in this game. It was one of the better Timberwolves playoff performances, period. Kevin Garnett game 7 against the Kings in 2004, that's legendary. So many great moments from that game. I don't know. Is there a better one? We could argue maybe one of the Ant games against Phoenix in a game that they won. But Ant had 44 on 16 of 25, extremely efficient. Only a couple bad shots mixed in there. Good decision-making, 5 of 8 from deep, 7 of 8 from the line. Big free throw miss late. 5 assists, 5 rebounds, a couple of steals, 1 block, which was late against Jamal Murray. 3 turnovers in 45 minutes. It was a stellar Anthony Edwards performance. The dunk he had, the two-handed explosion that he had in the fourth quarter was nuts. One of my favorite Ant dunks, actually. It was a little less flashy, but it was such a quick. It's almost like a Jaden McDaniels dunk with how quick it happened. He was up and then was down. Ball was through the rim. It was crazy. Ant was awesome in this game. If he does this, if Aaron Gordon doesn't go crazy and the Wolves hit a couple of free throws or whatever, it should have been enough for the Wolves. It's just a legendary performance. It really was. I'm going to give Mike Conley a stud in this game. He was great. 15 and 9 with 0 turnovers. 0 turnovers for Mike Conley. 5 of 12 shooting, 3 of 7. Hit a floater late when the Wolves are coming back. Hit a tough 3 late when the Wolves are trying to come back. Really nice Mike Conley performance. 15 and 9. 5 of 12 shooting, 3 of 7 outside the arc. And a steal and 2 rebounds for Mike Conley. So Ant and Mike are studs. Cat, Slow-Mo, and Alexander Walker are duds. Rudy's a nothing for me. I mean, I know he had 5 turnovers. There were moments that weren't great. There were moments that were good. The defense, I'm not laying at the feet of Rudy Gobert. Was he part of the problem? Sure. But again, this was more about Denver having the right strategy to defeat the Wolves defense than anything else. So I think Rudy's kind of in no man's land. No stud, no dud there. All right. Tuesday, we'll talk about adjustments, the counter adjustments, the adjustments as we lead into game 5. I predicted on Friday. I thought the Wolves would lose Friday. I thought they'd win on Sunday. I thought both games would be close. Tonight, Sunday night was close-ish. So I thought the Wolves would be up 3-1 in the series right now, but I thought they were going to split in Denver initially before the series started. I thought they'd split in Denver, win both at home, and be up 3-1. Coming into the weekend, I thought the Wolves would split at home and be up 3-1. Instead, we're tied 2-2. Now it's a best of 3 with Denver home court. Got game 5 Tuesday night in Denver. Game 6 Thursday night in Minnesota. It's going to be a ton of fun. All right, we'll have the show Tuesday, and we'll preview game 5 postcast. Likely, I think I'm hosting the postcast on Tuesday night, so look forward to that as well. We'll talk through a bunch of stuff on Tuesday's show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.